is a forum model. We want to make it really interactive, storytelling and sharing platform.
Water is the lifeblood of humans, animals, ecosystems, landscapes, wetlands, aquatic systems, and the larger natural environment. With climate change and rapid economic development, as well as too many cases of mismanagement, the world is reeling under water crisis. And of course, the water problem is not new, it is well known, and numerous solutions have also been proposed, tried, and implemented. But I think solutions have been prescribed rather than created. In too many cases, policies are created without engaging communities and understanding the context where problems occur. Some policy solutions have even made the water problems worse. So the organizing group of this forum shares a broad view, that we need to rediscover and reimagine participatory and interactive approaches to water governance and management. I believe that water challenges in a specific context cannot be tackled without more serious commitment to transdisciplinary, practice-focused, and policy-oriented approaches to learning and governing, putting communities and local stakeholders in the driving seat, and embracing the idea of co-production of knowledge, practice, and policy. But how we can achieve this in practice is challenging. It is easier said than done, of course. This is where we need to work together as a learning community, and hence we thought we convene this forum of Water Policy Lab.
Community as learners and their environment, rather than an externally designed goal to be achieved. The broader community, the farmers, the fishermen, the miners, the factory workers, the townsfolk, the teachers, the scientists, the bankers, the politicians, and definitely all their advisors. All of us learning together to design together informed, supported, and implementable policy. I think the stories you'll hear in this Water Policy Lab International Forum are exactly the sort of solution-oriented, policy-focused community learning that we need to address the complex challenges.
It's about the project called MARVI, which is managing aquifer recharge and sustaining groundwater use through village-level intervention. Groundwater is an invisible resource, and the policy is much harder there. And so what we have tried to do in this complex resource, that how can we engage communities, people, the farmers, and how we can develop that understanding working together. So the whole idea of the MARVI approach is about finding ways to reduce the overuse of groundwater and improve the sustainability of groundwater use through engaging with the village communities and improving their livelihood. So what we found was really engaging with the community. So we spent more time in the villages, sitting with the villagers rather than sitting in a hotel or having a meeting somewhere else.
In this village, Sultanpur, we found that there was a very serious problem of the poor accountability of the state agency engaged in providing water. So there was a lot of uneven distribution of water, there was leakage, there were broken pipes, there were illegal connections. So there were problems on both sides. So what we started to do was we started engaging a series of workshops where we brought the residents of the village into direct dialogue with the representatives of the public health engineering department. So one of the ways of bridging this gap is to come in as a kind of a mediator, to provide a platform for dialogue between the representatives of the state and the water users.
With the series of dialogues among multiple water stakeholders in the city, we have co-produced the idea of water forum, which is in Nepali we call as Pani Chautari, and applied in 4 of the municipalities in Nepal. Pani means water, And the Chautari is a public sphere along the trails to take rest up for pedestrians and also the platform for people to gather and discuss on social issues. Pani Chautari is a complete cycle of a policy process towards fostering evidence-informed dialogue and critical policy engagement on addressing city-level water-related issues. It helps to identify water-related issues, generate credible knowledge, facilitate to formulate specific policy, and then translate that policy into practice to resolve the issues. Pani Chautari is neither an alternative model of governing water nor a panacea to resolve all problems, but the engagement of researchers, community, and the local government representative have created an innovative model of involving users and stakeholders in planning and policy making.
We had established 3 water forums, including Mussoorie, Haldwani, and Nainital. What has really come out very well is the case of Nainital, where the stakeholders have created a group of people, around 200 people are part of discussing the lake system, which provides about 90% of the water to the town. And we have been constantly discussing with the stakeholders, which includes the administration, the civil society, and the experts, in order to come up with best practices that can not only conserve the recharge zones or the critical water zones, but also how to impact what can be the best practices for water conservation in the city.
The importance of using those sort of framings as part of the learning process is increasingly seen as an important aspect of practice change, but it's not a conscious behaviour for many teams. And so we need to put effort in with tools that can support reflection, like after action reviews or learning debriefs. So, my story is really just theory of change and rubrics. There are ways of helping with structuring and deepening people's thinking and planning for a project. And then after implementation, we can actually get people to do a structured reflection and provide them with a platform and space to reflect on what happened, what they're learning about, and what they're adapting.
When you're trying to engage and have inclusive water governance, are you talking about engaging on the knowledge side or the power decision-making side? I think that's a really critical question for our work. So how do we use technology, and what's the opportunity there to kind of unpack and use technology? How do we legitimize women's voices, particularly women who haven't really had a chance? They have a lot of knowledge, they have incredible knowledge, but they haven't always had a chance to share that knowledge or to speak out, a lot of times because of cultural norms around technology, cultural norms around even just speaking out and sharing their knowledge, whether or not it's acceptable or not.
The first starts back in about 2015, when I began to receive a stream of telephone calls from farmers and people in the community, First Nations people up in northwestern New South Wales, with very concerning allegations of significant water theft. And when I attempted to raise these allegations in a few meetings I was granted with government, I was told that I had no evidence, there was no proof, there's nothing to see here, there's no water theft. I determined that there was likely to be a significant problem, and so I began an investigation. And a year later, I had gathered significant evidence of non-compliance and possible misconduct within government. I approached one of our leading investigative programs, a television program. They investigated further. And the result was an episode of that current affairs program. It's called Four Corners, which aired in mid-2017. It had quite a significant impact in Australia. There were a number of formal investigations and inquiries that followed from that program. And one of those investigations included a series of recommendations, the most notable of which was a recommendation that the state that we live in southeastern Australia, in New South Wales, establish an independent water regulator to ensure that the law actually could be enforced. And that actually happened. So we now have a new independent regulator, well, it's a few years old now, that has brought 30 prosecutions, which is quite significant relative to what was happening a few years ago.
I think there's a real role for organisations that can play a role of holding space. sort of creating a container where partnerships and knowledge can interact. It's also the case with stakeholder engagement, and others have spoken about this too. We need to be able to create spaces for the conversations to happen where institutional divides can be bridged, and places where we can start to anticipate the information needs of policymakers and then link those to existing resources. And to do that in really digestible formats.
We have created a new section that is the Water Policy Lab. So we invited Hemant, Basant and Basu to be the guest editors of this section that was already published in the last issue, the latest issue. We introduced this Water Policy Lab with their editor special for the journal, and where they explain what is the strategic positioning of this lab, what are the aimings, and how they try to, or how this lab tries to initiate the dialogue between these two several key challenges: water insecurity, the disconnect between water knowledge and the application in policy and practice. We have been listening to many of these discussions and many of these aspects. So the new section will be a regular feature in the World Water Policy Journal. Of course, we invite all of you to anytime submit to our journal.
And as we all know, the water is becoming scarce. And one thing that is very important now is the policy. So if you have a wrong policy, it can be disastrous, or if you have a wrong policy, nothing happens. And so really the idea of the policy lab is very important. And the policy lab is about connecting people with the policy and their environment. So how do we manage this? And what we heard during this whole discussion was about doing together, co-creating the knowledge, co-learning, and co-planning and all those things. So thank you, and thank you all the speakers, and we'll meet again.